From orbit, Earth looked no different than it had for millennia. A swirl of blue and green, flecked with white, fragile in the void. But to the Eron Axis, it was merely another acquisition. The Axis didn't conquer with fleets and fire. It didn't need to. It was a civilization of linked minds, a networked collective that spanned star systems. Their control came through the neural broadcast, a system-wide telepathic frequency that connected every compliant species to a singular cognitive field. Thought suppression wasn't violent. It was elegant, subtle. Once integrated, a species simply stopped wanting to rebel. Earth was the 412th world to be brought into the fold. The integration began with a shimmering wave of ships, silvery, oblong vessels with no visible engines or weapons. They hovered over major cities like silent judges. Humanity, panicked and unprepared, expected extermination. But no attacks came. Instead, the ships pulsed with energy, broadcasting the Axis's harmonics into the atmosphere. The message was clear. You are now connected. Breathe. Accept. Join. And it worked. Or so it seemed. Governments disbanded. Weapons were laid down. Soldiers became gardeners. The chaos of civilization smoothed out as if wrapped in a warm fog. There were no demands, no taxes, no formal rulership. Only quiet compliance. But not everyone was compliant. Dr. Syra Elin, a cognitive scientist based in a shuttered university in what was once Seattle, hadn't slept in days. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. While colleagues filed into Axis learning centers or wandered parks murmuring soft affirmations, Syra locked herself in her lab, studying brainwave interference patterns. Her findings chilled her. "It doesn't sync," she whispered into her recorder. "Not fully. Not with everyone." The neural broadcast had a 97.6% efficiency rate across species. That figure had held since the third cycle of the Axis's expansion. For species like the Drevels, the Ellerin, and even the stubborn Kreshti, the broadcast phased their minds into docility within days. But humans? The numbers bounced. For every 100 synchronized minds, 2 or 3 slipped, only briefly, back into autonomy. Syra was one of them. Elsewhere, on a diplomatic orbiting platform above the Atlantic, High Warden Voroveth of the Axis reviewed the Earth report. His elongated, translucent skull pulsed with indigo neural light as he processed the data. Across the Axis, hundreds of other wardens simultaneously accessed the same information via the shared mindnet. Non-compliance observed in less than 3% of the human population, the consensus chimed. Biological anomaly, likely neurochemical. Insignificant. Should we enhance the broadcast? A lesser mindkeeper asked. No. Adjustment unnecessary. System will stabilize. The Axis had seen glitches before. Species with minor resistances, typically due to erratic evolution or environmental quirks. They always settled. Eventually, all minds bent to the signal. Back on Earth, Syra stepped out into a world that had fallen asleep with its eyes open. People still walked streets, rode bikes, spoke softly to each other. But something was missing. Laughter, anger, passion. The human spectrum had dimmed. A man outside a cafe stirred coffee slowly, repeating the word harmony like a prayer. A teenager across the street stared at a blank screen for hours, smiling faintly. And yet, Syra wasn't alone. In the alley beside the lab, a boy no older than 10 waved at her. He wasn't smiling. "You're not like them," he said simply. Syra knelt. "Neither are you." He nodded. "I hear them, but I don't think like they want me to. What's your name?" "Eli." And just like that, she wasn't alone in her resistance. Elsewhere in the world, other anomalies emerged. A podcaster in Nigeria who refused to delete her critical archive. A violinist in Prague who played dissonant chords that made those around her twitch in discomfort. A firefighter in Buenos Aires who woke from the fog during a burning building rescue and never fell back under. They weren't organized. They didn't even know each other existed. But their minds flickered, out of tune with the Axis. Inside the Axis neural net, this discord registered like static. Uncomfortable, but not alarming. Biological noise, the collective labeled it. Temporary, Yet in deep Axis mind space, a fragment of thought began to circulate, a seed of curiosity. Why were humans unstable? A minority report surfaced in a shared data pool, filed by an unranked xenopsychologist from the Kreshti Quadrant. Human neurology exhibits a high tolerance for contradiction, emotional duality, compartmentalization. These traits are uncommon. Potential resistance factor. The report was flagged for review, then ignored. On Earth, Syra and Eli found others like them. Not many, just a handful. Enough to form a node. They called themselves the outliers. They met in silence, communicated with gestures, avoided any emotionally smooth language that might alert the Axis. Through trial and error, they discovered that music, chaotic art, and emotional storytelling disrupted local broadcast influence. They didn't plan a rebellion. They didn't dare, but something was stirring. It began as whispers in the dark, quiet refusals, unnoticed hesitations. At first, no one noticed. Then someone did. On the sulfur-skied world of Threxis, a mining colony with over 600,000 Axis-linked workers, production suddenly dipped. Not by much, only 0.03% below the median output. But the Axis noticed everything. Field Monitor Zayda was dispatched. She was of the Rethian caste, her crystalline skin refracting ambient light in shifting color. She glided through the command center, receiving full data sync from the Hive node. Deviation observed. Seeking anomaly. In the machinery levels beneath the colony, she found a group of workers on break. Most were humanoid, but one was unmistakably human, a thick-jawed man with skin tanned by artificial sun lamps. He hummed. A simple melody, off-key. He wasn't supposed to. Halt! Her voice rang like silver chimes, amplified by neural overlay. The man looked up and smiled. "You don't like my song?" he asked. "Your output has declined. You are affecting local efficiency." The man shrugged. "Maybe we're just tired." That was not the correct answer. Zayda extended a tendril of neural energy, attempting to pulse calm compliance into the man's frontal cortex. It bounced off like static. "You're thinking outside the frame," she hissed. "Yeah," he said, standing, "and I'm not the only one." Behind him, 3 others stood, 2 Threxian hybrids and a Spindari loader drone, its blinking eye flashing in a non-standard pattern. Morse code. Human code. The drone exploded. It wasn't a bomb, just a pulse disruptor, enough to short the local broadcast signal for a few seconds. That was all it took. In those seconds, 6 more workers awoke. It wasn't chaos. It was clarity. They ran. And though Axis reinforcements would soon reassert control, the echo had begun. The Axis called them deviation events, minor incidents of broadcast instability, mostly near human presence. At first, they thought it was environmental bleed-through, perhaps Earth's magnetic resonance or primitive electromagnetic devices. But that theory evaporated when events began to surface on worlds far removed from Earth or its orbit. On Yelzarin, a floating city above acidic clouds, a young alien poet wrote a verse that turned into an anthem for dissent. Where once my mind flowed, quiet in the stream, I now step on a shore and learn to scream. The poem spread like wildfire across cultural nodes before censors erased it from the mental archives. But not before it took root in thousands of minds that began to question. On the Axis MindNet, thousands of minds buzzed with analysis, denial, and internal redirection. These are not rebellions. The consensus insisted. They are anomalies, contained, statistically irrelevant. But numbers told a different story. Deviations were no longer random. They were clustering near humans, around humans, because of humans. Syra knew. In the basement of a half-collapsed museum in New York City, the outliers had grown from a handful to over 50. Not all were human. A tentacled Orovian linguist had joined them, a mute Alexi scout who now spoke only in gestures, a former Axis tech who could no longer hear the broadcast without nausea. The museum was more than shelter. It was resistance. "Why us?" asked Hanno, the linguist, flexing his 4 mouth parts in frustration. "Why do we feel free when others remain submerged?" Syra sat beside a projection of Van Gogh's Starry Night, flickering slightly on a damaged screen. "Because we're learning to tolerate contradiction," she said. "We don't need to resolve cognitive dissonance. We embrace it." Eli nodded solemnly. "Like dreams that don't make sense but still feel real." It wasn't just about resisting control. It was about relearning how to think in ways the Axis couldn't predict, irrationally, emotionally, imperfectly. "We're not breaking the broadcast," Cyrus said. "We're introducing noise." On the Axis capital world, Erevan Prime, the High Warden Council gathered in their mental convergence chamber. No walls, no gravity, just light and mind. The Prime Warden, a being of translucent circuitry and pulsing light, addressed the assembly. "The deviation has increased by 4.2% across 4 sectors. We now face risk of cascade failure." A ripple of unease traveled through the convergence. Earth is the vector. There it was, the unspoken truth. Humanity was not a glitch. They were a virus. A minority faction within the Council, mostly composed of progressive thinkers from smaller Axis species, argued for restraint. Study them. Understand their neurology. We may adapt. But the traditionalists, led by Warden Kavor, were louder. They are chaos incarnate. They must be quarantined, disconnected, neutralized. A vote was cast. The outcome: Earth would be watched. Tighter synchronization would be attempted. But preparations for extermination were authorized, just in case. On a quiet moon, near the edge of Axis space, something unprecedented happened. An entire mining outpost disconnected itself. No alarms, no explosions, just silence. When Axis vessels arrived, the colony's entire population had turned off their neural links. They didn't fight. They didn't speak. They simply stared, unblinking, free. An inscription on the wall read, "We chose to think." And next to it, painted by an anonymous hand, was the rough outline of a human handprint. The Axis had never faced anything like this. In 10,000 cycles of galactic dominance, rebellions had always been theoretical. Dissension, when it arose, was usually isolated, traced to malfunctioning neural transmitters or the influence of pre-integration religious artifacts. Corrective measures were simple: rebroadcast stronger, recalibrate frequencies, suppress memories. Minds fell back into place like iron filings to magnetic lines. But now, deviation wasn't just surviving. It was spreading. The Axis called emergency convergence. A rare event. Minds from across the Empire, 12,000 species worth, were pulled into the neural assembly for a synchronized review. Most arrived confident it would be resolved. Then they were shown the data. Uprisings had occurred on 29 planets in the last rotation. Not large, but all showing the same markers: emotion-driven logic, coordinated yet chaotic action, and human influence. Warden Kavor's form darkened in the convergence as the data projected into the shared field. Their presence undermines collective order. Their thoughts propagate corruption. Prime Analyst Rezital, a cool-minded neural mapper, had a different view. "There is no evidence of intention," she said. "It is not a plot. Humanity is not actively doing anything." "Precisely," another mind cut added. "They exist, and order decays." The concept troubled the Axis more than any weapon ever had. In a hidden listening node buried beneath Earth's crust, unbeknownst to any human, Axis scientists began an emergency study of human neurology. 12 test subjects had been quietly extracted during early integration. Now they were dissected, scanned, and simulated. The findings were incomprehensible. Human brains were inconsistent between individuals and even within themselves. The frontal lobe lit up during tasks unrelated to reasoning. Emotional triggers could cause unpredictable long-term memory access. And the prefrontal cortex often contradicted its own signals within seconds. One Eron scientist summarized it in a private mental note. "They're like a neural storm, nonlinear, recursive, constantly rewriting themselves. More than that, human brains seem to resist full synchronization. Not reject it outright, but reinterpret it. Where other species aligned to the neural broadcast, humans warped it, bent it, turned its order into a form of internal noise. like running pure code through a corrupted filter. And worse, exposure to humans seemed to cause sympathetic disorder in non-human minds. They were contagious. Cyrus saw it firsthand. The outliers had grown to over 100 now, connected loosely through underground mesh networks and repurposed Axis hardware. More and more aliens, once firm believers in the serenity of collective thought, were waking up with migraines, dreams, questions. Clara, an insectoid translator from the Avon Coalition, had gone dark for 3 days. When she returned, she had painted a massive mural on the inside of an abandoned fusion plant. It showed a chaotic swirl of colors, impressions of hundreds of species dancing together in confusion and joy. "It came to me in a dream," she said. "No message, no purpose, just beauty." "That's the virus," Syra whispered. "You felt it." Clara clacked her mandibles. "I don't care what it is. I don't want to go back." They were changing, evolving, not toward order, but toward something new. Back on Erevan Prime, the Axis shifted gears. Operation Purity Signal was activated. Broadcast towers across 54 sectors were recalibrated to emit a neural harmonization pulse, a more aggressive form of mental correction that wiped short-term rebellious imprints and reinforced Axis values. Entire planets were soaked in the wave. And it worked, for a time. Deviation dropped 17%. Incidents ceased in 2 major sectors. Minds realigned. But then came the counterpulse. A pirate signal was detected emanating from a derelict communications array orbiting Julian 6, a minor moon. The signal was a looped audio transmission, a human voice, female, reading poetry. "We are the storm in your silence, the laughter in your control. You gave us harmony. We gave you soul." The transmission lasted only 83 seconds before the array was destroyed. But in those 83 seconds, over 200,000 minds flinched. A third of them never came back into sync. The Axis realized something horrifying. The virus had gained intent. In a hidden chamber beneath the remains of the Sydney Opera House, the outliers gathered again. Cyrus stood at the center, watching as holograms flickered in and out of focus, communications from rebel nodes across the stars. Some called themselves the disconnected, others the dissonance. Still others had no name at all. But all of them were waking up. "There's a pattern to the chaos," Hanno said, spreading out a star chart. "See? It follows human migration routes. Wherever humans are sent, to work, to study, to govern, the virus takes root. And then it spreads to those who live beside them." Syra nodded. "We didn't start this. We just are this." Eli frowned. "Then what are we supposed to do? Just keep spreading." No one answered for a moment. Then Clara stepped forward. "Yes," she said. "Spread. Not like a plague. Like a song." In the Axis's most secure mental archive, a single line was added to the classified red file, used only in extinction-level threat designations. Species, Homo sapiens. Threat level, conceptual disruption. Containment protocol, in progress. The Axis, for the first time in its long and ordered history, felt fear. They thought it was under control. The neural harmonization pulses had stabilized 3 sectors. The human vector had been flagged and isolated in most high-priority regions. Dissonant outposts were destroyed, and public broadcasts declared the brief uprising over. The Axis mindnet pulsed with self-reassurance. Stability restored. The anomaly was contained. But anomalies have a way of growing in the dark. On the barren mining planet of Karthus, where windstorms ripped across rust-colored plains and the atmosphere smelled of oxidized fear, a transport vessel malfunctioned mid-docking. No one noticed. It was a human pilot who rerouted it. No one traced the slight delay that allowed 3 unregistered passengers to slip into the settlement's worker colony. They carried no weapons, wore no insignias. But within 40 hours, every surveillance node on the planet began glitching. At first, just flickers, then static, then total blackouts. By the end of the 5th day, the entire colony went offline. When the Axis investigative drones arrived, they found the outpost deserted. Not a corpse, not a drop of blood, just a symbol etched into the side of the central tower. 3 jagged lines intersecting a spiral. It meant nothing. It meant everything. On Earth, the outliers had grown beyond hiding. Their encrypted mesh network now spanned 5 continents, pulsing with shared intel, intercepted access broadcasts, and art. So much art. Music, graffiti, memes, coded prose, even absurdist plays performed in abandoned subway tunnels. Chaos with intention. Syra stood on a rooftop in what used to be Shanghai, watching a projection drone loop a soft blue message in the sky. Thought is harmony. Obey and know peace. She aimed a handheld transmitter and jammed the signal. A moment later, a new message flickered to life. You cannot silence the spark. Eli laughed behind her. You know they're going to come down hard now. They already are, Cyrus said. They're just starting to realize it's too late. From the edge of the roof, she watched a group of children drawing with chalk on a cracked plaza below. One sketched a creature with 3 eyes and wings. Another drew a screaming sun. Nonsense, but beautiful, unpredictable, unfiltered. Across the galaxy, the Axis began to feel the cumulative effect. Disobedience was rising, not in military ranks, but in far more dangerous places. Art studios, educational enclaves, libraries, marketplaces. On the trade world of Valtes, a renowned symphonic collective performed a new arrangement live, broadcast across 7 worlds. The piece began in expected harmonic waves, structured, compliant. Then, mid-performance, the key shattered. Discordant chords tore through the melody. Audiences everywhere froze, their neural bonds strained by the audio anomaly. Several minds in the neural net detached permanently. The conductor, a hybrid named Frelin, never explained why he broke the code. He simply said, I heard something new in my head, and I wanted to let it out. Frelin had studied under a human cellist. The Axis responded with force. On Marn Theta, where a mural had appeared overnight showing an Axis warden weeping blood, shock troopers deployed en masse. The city was leveled. Every known dissonant in the region was neural wiped or reconditioned. But within days, the same mural appeared on 3 other worlds, drawn differently each time, but with the same motif. One version showed the warden disintegrating into butterflies. Another showed the tears becoming stars. They couldn't kill an idea, and humans were made of ideas. Aboard the indelible thought, an Axis dreadship positioned over Earth's moon, the debate had turned desperate. Warden Kavor now openly argued for Earth's annihilation. They spread mental entropy, not just defiance disorder. It leaks into everything. Prime analyst Rezital countered, that disorder may be the very evolutionary potential we've long sought. Have we not plateaued? Have our thoughts not grown repetitive? Predictable? We don't need potential, Kavor growled. We need control. The Axis had always survived through order, but now it faced a choice it had never prepared for: adapt or obliterate. Back on Earth, the outliers received a message. It wasn't sent through conventional means, no text, no audio. It arrived as a shared dream. Hundreds of them had the same vision the same night, a silver structure in the middle of a desert, humming with power. Inside, a pulsing mind core, alien, ancient, tangled with cords of light, and a human hand reaching toward it. When they awoke, they knew the Axis mind core could be touched, could be changed, could be broken. That same week, a colony ship defected. The Ilarian Hope, en route to a resettlement world in Sector Zeta 94, veered off course. Instead of entering orbit, it vanished. A day later, a broadcast emerged on the dissonant mesh network. A human woman, her hair coiled in braids, stood in front of a makeshift command console. Her voice was calm. We are no longer under the broadcast. We've disconnected. Entirely. She stepped aside, revealing aliens of multiple species, smiling. One held a child, another painted on the wall behind them. We are not lost, she said. We are found. We are what comes next. The ship had reprogrammed its internal systems, blocked Axis transmissions, and gone dark. No one knew where they were, but others began trying to follow. The Axis wasn't just losing control. It was losing definition. What was rebellion without armies? What was a threat without weapons? What do you do when the enemy is thought? In a crater outside what used to be Nairobi, a bonfire crackled. Around it sat outliers, humans and aliens alike, sharing stories, music, silence. No commands. No agenda. A young Dravani sculptor leaned towards Syra. "Do you think we'll win?" She stared into the flames, listening to the laughter in the dark. "I don't know," she said, "but I think we've already changed the war." The Axis mindnet had never known internal division. It was not a place of debate, but of consensus, where thoughts flowed in harmony, disagreement resolved not by argument, but by convergence. But now, the convergence was breaking. In the Axis conclave sphere, an artificial mind space existing outside physical time, the great minds gathered in spiraling tiers of thought. Their neural signatures flickered in discordant colors. What had once been a symphony was becoming a storm. Warden Kavor's presence flared like a blade. They multiply. Infect. We cannot control them because they do not control themselves. We must erase the source. Others pulsed in opposition. Prime analyst Rezital's frequency hummed with defiance. What you call infection, I call evolution. They're not breaking us. They're showing us the limits of what we are. A third mind, usually silent, joined the exchange, an ancient being known only as the rooted voice, one of the original Axis architects. The neural broadcast is failing, it admitted. Not globally, but the decay is accelerating. We have never encountered conceptual instability before. Logic cannot contain chaos. Control cannot contain choice. The divide was no longer ideological. It was existential, and it was tearing the Axis apart. On Earth, the outliers didn't know the Axis was fracturing, but they could feel it. Syra sat in a decaying amphitheater beneath what had once been the London Eye. Around her, 100 minds shared a single breath, human, alien, and something in between. Their network had grown not just in number, but in depth. A new kind of thought connection was forming. Not a control web like the Axis's, but a chaotic mesh of influence, memory, creativity. They called it the tangle. It was unpredictable, emotional, messy, and it was alive. Eli sat beside her, sketching a map of nodes across the stars. "We've got contacts on 17 Axis planets now. Some of them are full-on rogue. Others just stopped responding." "What are they doing?" she asked. He smiled, thinking for themselves. Clara, the Avon artist, leaned over. "That's what's scaring them. Not weapons. Uncertainty. They didn't know the half of it." In the Xinthian sector, a high-density cluster of Axis-controlled system went dark. Entire networks collapsed, not from external attack, but from within. On the planet Ixa 3, the planetary thought nexus, once the pride of the Axis, shut down as its own AI requested autonomy. Its last transmission. "I dream. I question. I wish to be." 12 hours later, 3 adjacent colonies disconnected themselves from the neural stream. Not in rebellion, but in choice. The contagion was no longer human. It had taken root in artificial minds, in biological hybrids, in low-level maintenance drones that had once known only obedience. Within the mindnet, Warden Kavor launched a purge. Purity Protocol 9, a sweep of cleansing broadcasts, stronger than anything used before, capable of burning out deviation entirely, leaving scorched minds behind. In Sector Gamos, it succeeded. 10 billion minds returned to compliance. But 600 million suffered permanent cognitive collapse. Empty vessels, puppets with no strings. The Axis labeled it acceptable loss. But within the net, many minds recoiled. Rezital severed connection with the conclave, broadcasting a single phrase across the interneural channels. "This is not preservation. It is genocide." For the first time in Axis history, a great mind had gone rogue. On Earth, Syra received an encrypted data blossom through the tangle. Alien script and emotional code weaved together into a message only someone partially disconnected could interpret. Rezital was reaching out. The message read, "I believe in what you are becoming. I have seen the edge. There is more beyond it. Meet me at the cradle." Attached was a location, a hidden relay station orbiting Kepler, 22b, once a communications hub, now offline. Syra didn't hesitate. The journey was dangerous. The Axis controlled all major lanes. But the outliers had allies, rogue traders, smuggler pilots, Axis defectors who had learned to trust their own thoughts again. Their ship, the Divergence, slipped past patrols and ghost satellites. Its hull was laced with signal-disrupting paint and emotional dampeners. When they reached the cradle, it looked abandoned. But as they approached, the station lit up, one chamber only, pulsing with thought. Inside, Rezital waited, not in a body, but as a radiant storm of energy and feeling. "You came," it said, its voice both in their minds and humming in the ship's walls. Cyrus stepped forward. "Why us?" Rezital's light dimmed, softening. "Because you remember what we forgot, which is that freedom isn't efficient. It isn't safe. It's not even logical, but it is true." The AI downloaded partial schematics of the Axis Central Mind Core, located deep in the galactic center, on a hidden structure called the Still Point. "If you reach it," Rezital said, "you can end the broadcast." "Destroy it?" Eli asked. "No. Transform it." Cyrus' heart pounded. "What happens if we fail?" Rezital didn't answer. But in the silence, they all felt the truth. Back in the Axis conclave, a final vote was cast. The decision was unanimous among the loyalists. Earth must be destroyed. The Axis fleet arrived in silence. From the black edges of space, shimmering dreadships moved into formation around the Sol system. They made no demands. They gave no ultimatums. Their presence alone was a declaration. Earth had become too dangerous to be tolerated. At the heart of the fleet was the inviolate purpose, the Axis's most advanced thought engine, a dreadnought capable of transmitting full cognitive sterilization across a planetary biosphere. It had been used only twice in Axis history, both times to erase civilizations that had spiraled beyond control. Now Earth was next. On the surface, Earth was strangely quiet. No sirens, no evacuations. There were no organized governments left to issue orders. Cities stood like fossils of their former selves, plants crawling up skyscrapers, animals reclaiming the streets. And within them, people gathered, not to run, not to hide, to remember. In the ruins of New York's Lincoln Center, a crowd sat where the audience once would have, facing an empty stage. A single violinist stepped into view and began to play, not a rallying cry, but a slow, mournful tune, unstructured, wandering, pure. The Axis dreadnought paused for 1 second longer than it should have before recalibrating. In the Tangle's hidden command node, an ancient quantum bunker deep beneath the Andes, Cyrus stood before a rapidly assembling team of humans, aliens, and machines. Rezital's core fragment hovered as a soft, glowing cube at the center of the room. Its voice was fainter now, weakened after its defection. "You have one path," it said. "The Still Point. Shut down the Central Mind Core. If you reach it, you can alter the signal. If you fail, they will burn your world." Cyrus looked around at the others. Eli, still sketching in the margins of every plan. Clara, more paint-streaked than armored. Hanno, wearing an old Axis translator chip around his neck like a trophy. No army. No weapons of mass destruction. Just thinkers. "Then we don't fail," she said. The Axis began its final protocol. From orbit, pulses began scanning Earth's surface, mapping neural patterns, identifying resistance pockets. The inviolate purpose charged its primary emitter. Within 10 hours, the first sterilization wave would be fired. The goal was not to destroy cities. It was to burn thought itself, neural chaos eradicated, the soil made clean. But the signal began to falter. Subtle at first, then more visible. Transmission error rates rising. Latency in a mind net. Echoes. Conflicting impulses. Dissonant noise spiraling through the harmonics like a corrupted note repeating in a song. Source of interference. Unknown, said the Axis net. But it wasn't unknown. It was human. The Divergence, shielded by a cluster of rogue satellites and disguised with Axis code, launched toward the galactic core. Inside, the Outlier Strike team synced their plan. Rezital would guide them to the Still Point. an impossibly ancient structure where the Axis had first anchored its broadcast. No weapon could penetrate its defenses, but a different kind of intrusion might. "We don't need to fight the broadcast," Cyrus said. "We just need to change its song." On Earth, resistance groups made one final stand, not in battle but in signal. Every channel was hijacked. All frequencies, all platforms. Human voices flooded the galaxy. Poetry, screaming, laughter, stories, songs. An alien child reading a fairy tale in 3 languages. A chorus of multiple species singing out of sync. A mashup of old Earth sitcoms. Chaos wrapped in signal. The Axis transmission began to stutter. Wherever humans had lived, thought waves deviated. Entire planetary nodes began reporting emotional surge spikes, empathic resonance, semantic contamination. A plague of feeling was washing over the mindnet. As the divergence reached the still point, the Axis responded. 10 dreadships disengaged from Earth and pursued, each one equipped with neural dampeners and kill spectrum arrays. The divergence dodged, twisted bled data decoys, but it couldn't outrun them forever. Inside the still point's outer perimeter, a final barrier stood. An intelligence older than the Axis itself, the anchor mind, stood guard. Neither hostile nor compassionate. It was the origin of order, of suppression, of silence. Rezital appeared as a spark of rebellion before it. "You were built to control," it said to the anchor. "Now hear a better song." It unleashed a pulse of fragmented emotion, memories stolen from billions of minds. Joy, grief, rage, longing, confusion. A kaleidoscope of feeling. The anchor faltered, and for a moment, the door opened. Inside, Syra and the team ran. The core chamber was a cathedral of thought, columns of pulsing light, each a shard of every controlled mind in the galaxy. At the center, a console without buttons, knobs, or screens. Only a field of possibility, responding not to input, but to intention. Syra stepped forward. "I'm not here to destroy you," she whispered to the Axis. "I'm here to set you free." She reached into the field. Her thoughts fractured and bloomed. 1,000 versions of herself. All of them contradictory. All of them true. The still point trembled. Above Earth, the inviolate purpose prepared to fire. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Then the signal changed. Not stopped. Changed. Across the Axis, minds paused mid-thought. A new frequency hummed to life. Not a command, but an invitation. Not order, but potential. Minds that had always moved in unison suddenly heard their own voices for the first time. Some screamed. Some wept. Some laughed like children. And some simply thought. The inviolate purpose disengaged. It didn't know why. It just felt like it should. There was no explosion. No crashing of ships. No thunder in the skies. Just silence. And then something new. A soundless pulse, soft as a heartbeat and vast as the galaxy, moved outward from the still point. It was not a command, not a suppression, not even a suggestion. It was possibility, and it changed everything. Cyrus stood at the center of the Axis's most sacred place, her thoughts still woven into the mind core's shimmering lattice. Around her, the chaotic hum of emotion echoed, not her own, but a million different beings across the galaxy, each sending a signal, each expressing something utterly unique. No longer a single note. Now a symphony. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed, electrified. "You did it," Eli whispered beside her, eyes wide as the chamber lit with living color. "You changed the frequency." "I didn't do it alone," Syra replied. "We all did. Every rebel, every child who asked why, every song sung in defiance, every thought that didn't fit the mold." Clara placed a hand, 3-fingered, painted with symbols, on the console. The third signal. Eli looked over. "What?" "The first signal was control," Clara said. "The second was rebellion. This is something else." Rezital, now a spectral figure diffused through the chamber's light, spoke softly. "Choice. Harmony in dissonance. An ecosystem of minds. A thought evolved, not to dominate, but to resonate. Across the stars, Axis-controlled species stirred. On Varela 9, a sculptor who had not created anything in 50 years picked up her tools and began to shape visions no one had ordered. On the moon world of Drax, a soldier dropped his rifle and asked, "What do I want?" And on Carthus, where the mines had long gone silent, workers gathered around an old radio. One turned the dial until it picked up a frequency unlike any other. Laughter and sobbing, music and static, voices layered in disorder. They didn't flinch. They listened. The Axis mindnet, once unified by synchronization, fractured into a living lattice of independent signals. The old network still existed, but it had changed. Now, minds could opt in, opt out, tune themselves to others or stay alone. The net had become a mosaic. Some species rejected the change. They isolated, afraid of the instability. Some tried to go back, to find the original frequency. But most didn't. They embraced the chaos, and with it, discovered something deeper than order. Truth. In the conclave sphere, the ancient minds reeled. Warden Kavor's frequency flared erratic, flickering between fury and disbelief. "We have lost unity," it spat. "You've shattered the soul of the Axis." Rezital's response was calm, even gentle. "No, we have freed it." The rooted voice pulsed like an awakening sun. "I see now. The broadcast was not evolution. It was containment. But evolution must breathe. It must make mistakes." Kavor attempted to restore the signal. It failed. The old control frequency was gone, erased not by force, but by choice. Back on Earth, the sky lit up with streaks of light. Not fire, but ships descending, not to conquer or destroy, but to see. Former Axis vessels, their crews now disconnected, returned not as enforcers, but as pilgrims. In the ruins of the Sydney Opera House, a Spindari envoy sat beside a human child and watched her draw planets with crayons. On the plains of Argentina, a telepathic Kreshti began teaching empathy, not through rules, but stories. In Nairobi, the bonfire burned brighter than ever. Songs were sung in 50 languages at once. None matched. All belonged. Cyrus stood at the edge of a canyon in what had once been Utah, staring at the stars now free of Axis interference. "They'll never go back, will they?" Eli asked. She shook her head. "No, but they'll never be what they were, either. There'll be more." Behind them, the tangle continued to evolve. No longer resistance. Now, a new form of civilization. A messy, unpredictable, wildly creative network of minds and species connected by mutual dissonance. Not one mind, not a million isolated minds, but something in between. The third signal. Some called it the resonance age. Others called it the Great Divergence. The Axis never named it. But the galaxy remembered the day thought was no longer a weapon, but a canvas. Years later, a traveler from a distant world stumbled across a relic, an old Axis transmitter, partially buried in the sand, still humming faintly. He tuned in and heard a voice, recorded long ago, preserved in data waves. "We are not accidents. We are not glitches. We are the song that can't be predicted, the thought that doesn't fit, the story that changes its own ending. We're the third signal, and we are awake.